We're about 5 after. It's Wednesday, the 10th, 2021. Thanks everybody for coming to the Meshery development call. We've got a collection of oldies, I guess. No one on the call needs an introduction. Everybody's been here more times than I can count, so this is good. And we've got some meaningful things to discuss today. Now is the right time to pop open or to list out any topics that you might have. So a quick call for topics. If you have one that isn't listed, please jot it down. Since Alonso is on, I know he's got one that we would like to follow up on. I'll put his name down. So take a moment to put down topics if you have them. And if you're on the call, please, put your name into record your name. Also, everyone gets to hear from me a lot on our calls, and you don't need to. It doesn't have to be this painful. Other people can wear the hat of the project manager, of the note taker, of the host, and other people can make jokes. So think about it. Next time we go around, just signal before the call if somebody wants to kind of host and sort of steward us through each topic. Get me to shut up and us to move on and get productive. So having said that, let's get productive. Let's go. One of our bigger topics is the readiness for our upcoming Meshery release, the V050. It's a massive release. It's, by all measure, it's a major release. We're just not at the point by which we're making our first major release yet. And well, why aren't we making our first major release? Well, that's because things are still fairly fluid. When you hit a 1.0, for better or worse, that's just sort of our collective industry standard or a signal for production readiness. And there are aspects and certain functions of Meshery that are and have been and production ready for a long time. People have been using Meshery for certain features for a long time. There are other aspects of Meshery that are being built out and new architectural components being added. There are, I'm not sure, 4, 5, or 6, depends on how you want to count, new architectural components inside of this .5 release. So it's significant, and that's why a number of you have signed up to help with the release announcement, and not just a singular announcement, but individual blog posts on features to go into those features in depth. Some of those are, so this is the beginnings of a draft. All of you are encouraged to toss in some words here. Briefly, we listed out these items as things to highlight, and that's for certain not the only things to highlight. There's a number of other large, significant things. All of the adapters, or nearly all of the adapters, had an overhaul in this release. They are in a much better position. They're much improved. They're much more consistent. MeshKit was brought forth. What is MeshKit? And the Meshery adapter library. What is that? How are those used? Why is that important? Why do we rewrite these things? Like that, those types of stories and that type of information, that's a great blog post. Yeah, okay. And we've got it down here in this issue. So there's a bunch of things to write up and talk about. This is an opportunity for all of you to get your name out there. Even if you didn't, I'll say this, even if you didn't directly work on one of these things, we still need volunteers to write up stuff. So it's a good way to learn how Meshery works by trying to write some of it down. Even if you can't do the full blog post, that's fine. Get some words on paper. It just helps move things forward. The intention then is for us to, have some docs updated, the Meshery docs, also to have an announcement that goes out that looks, somewhat similar to this, talking about what the release is and the highlights, and then linking people out to in-depth individual posts on each of these features. So take a look, put your name on things if you like. This is one of the things that we need to do before we make the release. A few of you have draft blog posts out there and ready for review. So that's another way to get involved, is to review existing or the drafts of others. I'll highlight one that we have right now. So Asuko, whom I think a lot of you haven't had the opportunity to speak with. Asuko's a maintainer, actually. And he'd been focused on the Linkerd adapter for a long time. He's focused on across the adapters now. He wrote up a bit about MeshKit and the Meshery adapter library. It's the layer 5 repo that has the layer 5 IO site that, an entirely new version of it will be released soon, very soon. It'll be much improved. In the meantime, here's a link to Asuko's, and at this point, I think it's a draft that he started, but I think a number of other people have begun to add to it. And so this type of a thing is something that Asuko sees a lot. He lives in China. He deals with the Great Firewall of China. He's actually moving out of China in part because of that. So he's going to go off. He just got into school, grad school in Australia. Here's the link to his post. Please review. Okay. Along with the release itself, we would, and the post that describe the features, we're getting to a point wherein our process they have been and they continue to evolve. One of those is around, well, how do we do testing? How do we ensure the quality of the software, the quality of the features, that they're doing what they said that they would do, and that as we make a next release, we don't regress in quality? There are two documents that are oftentimes used to help characterize and provide some process around tests and how they're made. So certainly there's there's an in-depth document out there about how we do build and release. So it's the Meshery build and release document, or build and release strategy, and it lays out how builds are done very well, how the artifacts are released very well. So really tightly coupled with that is the notion that we would, and this document really hasn't been written, but this is more focused on quality. So what tools are we using? And it hasn't been written. What are the criteria for making release? What tools are we using to perform tests? So Cypress is one of those. Bats is another. How CodeCov is now been integrated. These are tools that we're using already to guarantee and help verify quality. So it's a call for volunteers to articulate that more. Part of what we would probably, not probably, but something that we would for sure write in here is what if any gating criteria we have for making a release? How many open high severity issues can there be? How many do we make beta releases, and then do we have release candidates? And the answer is, yeah, we do these things. We make beta releases, we have release candidates. Well, what's the graduation? What's the criteria by which we graduate from one stage to the next? Some of this just needs articulated in a general form, while a test plan is potentially more of more like a spreadsheet, probably, which is much more specific to the software under test, like what test cases are you running? These would be, high level integration tests. So it's, in some respects, it's kind of a catalog of functionality that Meshery has, and then verifying that that functionality is in fact intact and functions as it should. So the discussion here isn't to wrap a bunch of slow process around what we're trying to accomplish. It's more to help inspire confidence for users, confidence for ourselves that we're not collectively, that all of you aren't having to answer or both haphazardly and somewhat urgently try to fix issues and answer users' questions on why they're having problems with a certain area. Defects are highly unproductive. We want to take, very much so an automated approach to these things. Just like the highly like actually the entirely automated approach that we have to building and releasing. There's only one manual step at this point when we make, well, there's two. When you make a release, the one manual step is when we make a release is a human goes over and clicks the release button. So they give it a name, Meshery version 0.50, and they click the release button. And that's intentional because it's just, we're continually releasing into the edge release channel. When we want to make a stable release, all of us, first, well, how do we know when we want to? How is that defined? Well, we should probably write that down. Two, since that's a manual thing and we're going to be releasing to stable builds into that release channel, it's more of a human thing to press the button. There's a component of that though where we need to work on the versioning of our documentation. So, and that's a topic here. Anirudh, are you on today? No, he's not. So maybe that's not it. So it is a topic we need to version the docs. I don't know if you've noticed when you go out to Meshery.io, there's lots of docs. They're coming together, but it just assumes that you're running the latest. We need to have a drop down somewhere that lets you switch between doc versions. And in order to do that, we actually have to have different versions of the docs, like individual copies of the docs. So that's the only other manual portion to making a release today. I mean, that's something that's a little bit unsolved as to how we version those docs. Anirudh has been working on this, but isn't done. Any comments or questions about the release?
Lee, I just have a quick question. Is there a spot where somebody like myself, Stephen Miller, could upload some templates for unit, system, and source testing? They're pretty good, from former life, but the templates. And also, the second question was regarding to your testing. Do you use, or versioning rather, document versioning? Do you use any component of SharePoint document libraries or Teams or anything like that, or is this manual type versioning? And also, does it go into GitHub?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Fantastic. To answer your first question, here's this link here goes out to the community, the shared community drive. There's a folder in there. So just to sort of orient us and navigate us for a moment, there's the Meshery folder, the build and release folder, and in here it's somewhat light of a folder. Like, hey, there's the release strategy. There's copies of like earlier drafts of releases. So the one that we were just looking at, but that's it. Like it's missing some of those artifacts that you were just talking about. So yeah, please, this is a good area for templates, kind of an approach to defining and looking at integration tests, unit tests, that kind of. That'd be great.
Great, thank you. I'll put something up there.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Lee, may I just say a few words?
Sure.
If I want to put in something in that master test strategy, should I just go and put what I have to say?
Yeah, please. Yep, because it's yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to say is, there are a lot of testing frameworks. Now the problem is, you have to keep the testing framework updated with your development, because if you don't, the testing framework will break, and its value is diminished. So maybe there is you can have a system whereby the testing framework is part of the development. So that as you create something, you automatically programmatically create a counterpart, like you have a test development project along with your. I mean, I don't want to I'm sure you have your own system, and it's not that I'm not advocating taking off on a tangent, but just a couple of thoughts.
Those are lovely thoughts. I have some things to say about this. Just before I forget, I want to, the second question that Stephen had gotten asked is, Stephen, yeah, to your question about the docs version, or the versioning of the docs.
Yes.
They are stored in GitHub, and
okay, so it's versioned there.
Yeah.
At a minimum, you can get to it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll put a link to where those are. I'll put it under this here /docs, and they run on Jekyll. There's in the community drive, there's a Google Doc that talks about the docs. So that talks about the fact that it's like based on Jekyll, uses this and does that. And actually, if you spend any time thinking about it, please do ping Anirudh. He put together a short doc that talks about different options to approach versioning of the documentation. So very good. And then so back to Vijay's comments. Vijay, what's funny is that's your first comment about recognizing the value of unit tests or integration or any testing framework is that on the surface of it, highly valuable because you'll have confidence that things are working. And then as soon as a change is made to the code that it's testing, you just broke the unit, you just broke the test case, or the test harness itself needs to be updated. And so then all of a sudden you've got about twice as much work as you'd had before, because now you've got to carry those test cases along with you as you make changes to the behavior of the system. Oh, wow, what a frustrating. So like half the time you don't know, is that test case failing because it wasn't, because the code itself, the behavior of the code is wrong? Or is the test case failing because we just forgot to, whoever changed the code recently forgot to update the test case? And so when an initial...
That's a good argument for, I'm sorry, there's a lag here, I guess. That's a good argument for CI/CD and DevOps, the way you check out a branch and check in a branch, and you can always revert, and you might use something like Jenkins. I don't know if you use that or not. It checks the branch to make sure that it will compile and it will hopefully not generate errors. Then it goes to QA, and each time, all this feedback is going back to the developer, who can make those incremental changes, which can be done, as quickly as, I don't know, a daily basis or something. I don't know if you guys are employing that type of concept or not.
Yeah, no, that's a great. Yeah, the builds are done in GitHub Actions, so like a Jenkins, and there's recently there's been the addition of the use of CodeCov to help inform us as to what percentage of the code that's been written, the functions that are there, what percentage of them have unit tests that have been written to test out those functions, and then how many of those are passing. So yeah, still
Yeah.
onto you. Yeah. And so there's a blog there's a blog here that I think actually even myself would benefit from going back to read. So the link that to this blog post is a link to the new Layer 5 IO site that will be published soon. Is written by Rudolfo, who's leading up the bi-weekly Meshery CI call. And some time ago, he had helped us invest into Cypress UI as the integration test framework. And so if you're familiar with a JMeter or a, God, what's that other one?
Selenium?
Yeah.
Could you repeat that?
Selenium.
Oh yes. Yeah, and there's a great there's actually a great YouTube post. It's a YouTube channel and posting that's like 10.5 hours long, and this guy goes all through that CI/CD cycle, and he mentions he talks about using Selenium in there. Yes.
Very good. So in this post by Rodolfo, it highlights the fact that we've begun to use Cypress UI, and he had given a presentation on this topic about how it is to VJ, to your point about how to avoid fragile test cases, how to make sure that the test cases that you're writing are as resilient as possible to change. Because yeah, you want to avoid that overhead. So he wrote up a he's got a deck inside of the Google Drive on best practices. So how to write tests with Cypress, and there's a recording of him presenting that. I'm not sure, it's just a little while ago. He actually, there's a Wednesday, a bi-weekly call on Thursdays, on Thursdays, that focus on CI, and he has some open issues that he's asking for help on in terms of writing some of those unit tests. So I encourage you guys to dive in there. He's nice. He's a nice guy. He's leading up that effort, and there's many more functional tests to be written. VJ, I think part of what you were sort of driving at was maybe not entirely test-driven development, because that doesn't necessarily mean that your test harness, your test framework is any less fragile. But as part of maybe part of what you were bringing up. I think, anyway, the short of it is like, yeah, hey, Cypress UI is probably the place to go dig into and cool. Okay, so next topics up were, well, is Augustine on?
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm on the call.
Yeah. Oh, okay, great. Yeah. I don't know if you want to, share you want to talk about performance profiles, that feature, maybe share the mock-ups and some of your notes from a recent discussion with one of the users?
Okay, all right. I'll get. All right. So we've been able to come up with. Okay. We've been able to come up with some mock-up regarding performance, Meshery performance test, and Meshery performance rather, and it's the workflow of how the user carries out their processes from seeing seeing the run test, scheduling test, and also giving them the ability to edit the test, save results, view the test results, and and um then also check the test configuration, which they can save and use to run future tests. And from the conversation we had with one of the users, we also created a tabular representation of Meshery performance management, whereby you can see the last test you ran, the endpoints, the next test you run from which you indicate from your schedule, and it gives you the ability to check your actions, run your test, check more actions, and then from the conversation we also had the user persona, we got some feedback about creating performance for configuratory tests to run on any clusters, and giving users ability to save configurations for their test in the sense that for future tests, you can use past configuration and not have to go over each configuration every time they are running the test. That also improves the user experience of using Meshery. And then having an endpoint outside the test configuration so that it can be changed at an higher level. And the ability to also schedule tests for later dates. Either you can choose, for example, you want to run the test bi-weekly, give you the ability to run your test or schedule your test whenever you want, bi-weekly, weekly, monthly, depending on your choice. So that these are the little mock-ups we've been able to draw from the user perspective and the user flow and the user journey to improve on the user experience of Meshery.
Okay. And then, so Augustine, you had a recent discussion with Neha of Flipkart. She was using Meshery to do a number of performance tests. And what was her feedback on the design?
Neha said she will be unable to join the call because she's busy. So the feedback was these were a few of her feedback which I wrote down for the easy documentation, and then we also which recommended giving us allowing the user store configurations, past configurations, so they will not so as to improve the user experience, and also recurring and scheduling feature at the test level and not individual at the test suite level and not the individual tests not the individual test level. So those are I've had major feedback, and working on the endpoints outside the configuration. those were Nia's feedback, and she said she was okay with, she was pleased with the whole- the performance of Meshery.
Oh, nice. Okay. So good. So I'm glad that thanks for meeting with her and taking her through the thinking around this new feature. We, if many of you are like me, we are starved for a bit of feedback. And so we want to, spend as much time with users as we can. There's a lot of people, there's a number of people using Meshery. So there's like a little over 700 people who've downloaded and tried it and done things with it. Recently, this last month, about 2 weeks ago, someone used the performance testing capability. They'd used it pretty intensely. Like, I don't know, ran many hundreds of tests, and that's fantastic. And so getting some feedback from them, I don't know if that was Neha or not. Augustine, did part of your conversation go into that? Did she say how much she'd used?
No, she didn't mention how much she had used it.
Okay, good. Well, let me give everyone else just a little bit more context here so that people can weigh in. So here's where we are today with Meshery and its performance capability. So when someone wants to, Meshery will, I think the best way of articulating it, there's kind of two terms to articulate what Meshery does around performance. One is performance management. I think that's the umbrella term that we would use for the things that it does and will do. Part of the way that you would describe how it does performance management for workloads, either on the service mesh or not, is it does a bit of performance characterization. So generate load, analyze your environment. There's a few of you in the community who are more of a data science background, or not more of, but are of a data science background, and are working on algorithms to help users better tune their environments automatically. Meshery doesn't do that today, but that's kind of where we're headed. So the thing that you can do today is run an individual performance test. And as a user, Meshery will discover what service meshes you have deployed. So I have a few, and you can go create a test and give it certain parameters, identify what endpoints you want to hit and how hard, and all these things. After a while, if you're using this intensely and you're having to type in basically all this every time you run a test, it gets old fast, right? Having to type it all in. So the feature then is to have a performance test profile, so that after you fill this in, when you're done, you can just click, save this configuration as a profile. And later, when you want to rerun this, or if you want to schedule it to run, you just schedule the profile. You don't have to fill it in again. Also, sort of later when you come back to look at some of those results, you are able to look at the results in context of that profile. So if you configured certain parameters of the test that you want to run, and you've run that same profile a bunch of times over, that same test, great. Then maybe structure the results in that same way so that I can go over to, the soak test, go over there and I'll look at how many times that was run and how it's changed over time. And okay, good, that's helpful to me. Or it's the soak test for that application. Okay, great. So that's what we're hoping to improve. That's kind of the problem statement. There's in the meeting minutes, we went ahead and put in a link to a discussion that's in Slack that talks about what the feature is supposed to do, what questions it's supposed to answer, help people answer. So here's a discussion in the performance channel on letting people know, hey, what was the last performance test that was run? What were the results? How many performance profiles do I have? Just these various things. So I went ahead and took Augustine has been working on these mock-ups. I went ahead and took downloaded a copy of one of the mock-ups and just put it into the meeting minutes, so you can sort of check it out more in depth. Augustine, if you don't mind, that mock-up tool that you're using the wireframing tool, Figma, if you don't mind, two things, go ahead and put a link to here so that people can go look at it, more in depth. And then if you would, the notes from Neha here would be great as well. So she basically gave 3, if I understand correctly. One of the notes is like in my mind, very prominently a positive thing and something that should be done. She was essentially calling for the split out of a new logical construct. And what she had said was, this endpoint that you have here, like what application you're going to test or what service you're going to send load to, her comment is, hey, I have a lot of those. And actually, I track different things, like they have names, they have different versions. Basically, these sort of represent the various facets of my applications, my workloads. It might be nice that like I've got a soak test configuration that says like, hammer on this thing at this much for, this long. And so great, I want to run this soak test against that endpoint, which is this here, against that one. But I also want to run that same soak test against that one, that one, that one. So she's calling for a degree of separation and a splitting out of endpoints or applications or whatever we want to call those. She's asking, hey, can those be split out separately? So now I can have a performance profile that I can save and recall and tune and tweak over time, can associate that with my different endpoints, marry those up, ad hoc run a test, or I can marry those up and schedule a recurring test. To me, that feedback sounds quite sensible and a lot more powerful, more usable. Anyone else have comments? You can see some of Neha's. Oops, something just happened with Google Docs for me. You can see Neha's feedback in the doc. So this has been something that we've been trying to get to for a while.
AWS has a CLI and a YAML-driven interface for launching things. So you can have a graphical interface like the one that you had, or you can have you might be able to script the same thing and do that from the command line, and so you might be able to automate that by writing an entire script, or you can simply make it declarative and specify what. I mean, I don't know if all those things are applicable here.
They are. VJ, you're on fire today, man.
No, I don't want to, say too much, I mean, see, because I haven't been a regular member, I mean, I try to read this stuff, but I don't want to simply come here one day and talk a lot and not and disappear.
Yeah. The thing is no, it actually gives us an excuse to talk about it a bit more, because there are many of us that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of us that are here in the same boat as you, which is there's facets of what we're doing that you've been involved in it and understand. And there's other stuff going on. There's so much going on that while you have a day job, you can't keep. So anyway, this gives me a good excuse to explain the fact that yes, that declarative model that you were just saying, hey, maybe I don't want the UI. That's great. I can see a graph. That helps me. And that speaks volumes to me. Although it might also be the case that I just want this thing running every time that I go to make my own software release. I'd like for you to generate some load, test it out, and tell me my app is still good. My infrastructure is still configured in such a way that I won't have performance degradation for my users. So I'd like to just have this component of Meshery as part of my own CI process. And I don't need a UI there. As a matter of fact, being forced to do mouse clicking there, that's not going to work for my automation. So So two things that you mentioned that make a ton of sense is, well, one, that Meshery has a REST API, which people can use to invoke these tests. Great. Sometimes that's easy. Sometimes that's the preferred API. Sometimes that sounds like a messy developer thing. So there's Meshery CTL. It has the command perf, Meshery CTL perf, that lets you specify the exact same parameters that you see in the UI about what endpoint you want to test, how long you want to do it. And as a matter of fact, like to your next point about, okay, that's good. I can programmatically invoke this, simply by using a command line client, and I could embed that into my CI process or something. But geez, what if, again, if I have these performance test profiles and I want to reuse them, can't I just like save that into a file? And it's like, yeah, actually, that's what this is, SMP spec, service mesh performance specification. It's a specification by which you're able to say in a YAML-based format, like, hey, I'd like to take this test case and represent it in a static format. And so over here, you could do a Meshery CTL perf -f for file or -- file either, and then say, so it contains an SMP compatible test configuration. Nice. So this is my soap test A, or what, and then and then use cron or whatever to schedule this. Shortly, at some point, hopefully, in Meshery, there will be a workflow engine which will have a scheduler so that you can go schedule those tests in Meshery, and just Meshery server itself will, you'll have multiple avenues from which you can invoke the performance test. VJ, when I said you're on fire, I meant like you're on point. Like, do those things make sense? Do those align with what you were describing? And you might be on mute, VJ, just in case you're.
Okay. Yes. So I see that you have some of the stuff. You have that stuff. I didn't realize. I didn't go through that.
No. This is good. No. Now you're obligated to go try it out.
Yes, I will.
VJ, actually, specifically for some of the things that you've helped advance in the Meshery project, Abhishek, so VJ had been instrumental in the discovery of Prometheus and Grafana instances that are floating around, like as part of MeshSync. Abhishek, did you mind speaking to that a little bit? VJ may be one of the individuals that could come to bear on this.
Sure. So my recent work on MeshSync to upgrade it to version 2 involved a couple of changes and actually enhancements. One of them is that we get the meshing data in which we got the Prometheus and Grafana pods or application endpoints, uh, and basically using that data, leveraging on that data to auto discover or directly fetching the endpoint, and like directly, or a smart way to connect to those endpoints while Meshery is getting started. That was the whole idea around it. So my implementation is that I created a GraphQL endpoint in which I've defined a couple of queries which would answer to the available uh, Prometheus and Grafana endpoints, like from the meshing data, whatever we have. So we don't have to individually do API call to discover these Prometheus and Grafana applications, but instead we can leverage on the data, and then like basically the GraphQL endpoint would be the only go-to endpoint to, sort of to fetch information about these two.
Oh, that is great stuff. So now in the UI, it automatically populates Grafana and Prometheus.
The whole integration has not been done because I've brought it till the GraphQL endpoint. Basically, the UI, the chips that we've defined needs to be, sort of configured to call those GraphQL endpoints and get the data. So that
Yes,
that
that
part
was.
is not right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So that was exactly what I was thinking. It wasn't calling the the API. So, and also I had a couple of thoughts on that user interface. Right now, it is a drop-down box, and there is a preference object which gets populated with. But that preference object, the way it is structured right now, it holds only one instance.
Mhm.
Uh, so what I think what we need to do is change that preference object so that it can hold a list or an array of all the uh, Grafana and Prometheus. I don't know if you're using the preference um, uh, object. I think the idea behind the preference object is what the user has saved as like a, as the preferred instance or something like that. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so well, I think actually maybe I'm wrong. So even if you discover a bunch of Grafana and Prometheus, the preference object will still have only one instance, right? Because that is the preference. There is only one preferred instance.
Correct. You're exactly right. Like that's the main reason behind which we've not touched the front end part yet, because the whole design principle needs to be changed. We'll need to accommodate, or we'll need to account for multiple instances of Prometheus and Grafana, more specific to each and every service mesh, maybe.
Okay,
So that's a part where work needs to be done.
right. So I actually, um, I fell behind. I looked into this a lot. I tested a lot, and the problem is I did not know React, but now I picked up React a little bit. No, but the last couple of months have been really a little rough. And I hate to say this because I know Lee, you're taking on a lot more than that, But I haven't been able to do that. But these were some of the things that I was thinking about. I was trying to run some tests. I had some debugging code in JavaScript. Trying to put. So I did notice. I think you have changed the back end. So what I did notice that there is a particular code. What it looks for is it passes the Grafana and Prometheus keywords, and it gets all these particular instances out, right? Is the code, are you still using that, or there's something else now?
The current release has the same what you've
Okay,
described, but the V2 that we are that I just described just now is a different one. It's completely deviated from that.
okay, that's fine. So anyway, at that time, that was returning, Grafana instance. But in any case, I suspected, that there was one of the things that I was trying to test. I was in the process of doing that. The front end is not being populated because it is never being called. That's what I thought. And it looks like you're saying the same thing, right?
Yes, correct.
Yep. Yeah, VJ, you're right that that particular area had improved since last in the back end had improved since last you looked at it, and that it is now it will discover any Prometheuses and Graffanas in the environment. It will populate this component. It won't auto register though. And to your point about an array, like not just having a singular registration of like Meshery right now, we need to have an environment an actual environment construct that says, oh, not just that, but also an array for these instances, such that it is valid that you might have multiple instances of Prometheus, multiple instances of Grafana. It is valid that maybe that cluster is using that Grafana and that Prometheus. This cluster is using that one. And so cluster and environment, they're not synonymous. We actually need to go out and define what is an environment. What does that mean? And how do these, what's the relational model in which these come together such that then like the mission that you were on some time ago could actually be achieved, because without having a logical model for how these things are to relate, and you what does it mean if a user registers one instance in their preference but not another? And so this logical model is to help with that, to be able to describe, okay, hey, let's allow people to, right now Meshery has, it doesn't really know of an environment. It doesn't have that noun in its object model vocabulary. There's sort of an implicit singular environment in which Meshery can connect to one Kubernetes cluster at a time. It can connect to different instances, but only one at a time. And it needs to be up leveled to say, well, wait a second, you can, let's allow the user to register and keep track of multiple Kubernetes clusters. Let's allow them to do the same thing for the Grafanas and Prometheuses. And then let's create some logic around which they can, unto their own devices, like unto their own desire, they can create basically a group, an environment, give it a name. This is my prod environment. In my prod environment, here's the connection to this cluster, the connection to that Prometheus and that Grafana. Great. Now, when I go through, like assuming that was there, when they were to go through the UI and they were to go, to go over to manage console, instead of them implicitly, like right now, it's implicitly just defined that when I mess with this namespace, that this namespace belongs to the singular Kubernetes cluster that I can connect to. Well, wait a second, like, hey, as soon as we start to add the ability to connect to multiple clusters and allow people to invoke, Meshery to invoke different operations on different clusters, well, we need to come back over here and, I don't know if I'm going to use the right word, but sort of up level this as well. We need to be able to let people switch between what cluster and then the namespace, because namespaces are cluster specific. Basically, we need to then bring forth a switcher, a construct that lets people move between environments and apply these things between environments. We're about ready. Like, or by we, I always mean inclusive of everyone that's on this call, but I also, in this case, I sort of mean Meshery as a piece of software has reached a phase of maturity that, like, it's ready to take on that type of a complex thing. And it's not that complex. It's not like that's not achievable like this. It's more just about us humans writing down some words that say an environment allows you can have these things inside the environment. You can have one or more than one Grafana instance in an environment, or you can't. We just need to make up those rules, and that's not very difficult. So we're right at the top of the hour. Abhishek, I was pretty excited about some progress that you had just reported in Slack, and so I quickly tossed this up here. Can you speak to this for just a moment?
Well, not a big progress, I would say, but I was able to sort of build the whole Nighthawk application, the client server and the test server, basically with the C dependencies and everything. It takes quite a bit of time, like almost 15 to 20 minutes solid. But yeah, I was able to build the applications and do run some sample queries. So we're ready to move ahead with the rest of the process, which involves uh, creating the CI website and whatnot.
Nice. That's fantastic. So for those, so as we go to end here, for those that are, if anyone's interested in this project, if you don't, then here's the link to the doc. It's in the meeting minutes. There are a number of things called out at the very bottom of this doc. I'm going to refresh this. There's some tasks that there's some tasks that have yet to be defined, tasks that have yet to be executed on. There's a project site that needs to be made, and a bunch of GitHub actions and kind of builds to do. So anybody have anything else before we wrap today? Oh, speaking of workflow engine analysis, we'll probably invite the Caverno folks to present on Friday, the community call. Because it's not just a workflow engine that we'll have in Meshery, but it's also a policy engine. So I'll put a link to the analysis here. Oops. Anybody have anything else today? Nice. Okay. Well, say hey, same time next Wednesday, and sounds like we've got a lot to do. So nice to have you all. Yeah, Alonso, you're not off the hook on the international language plugin. So I see you there. Cool. Okay. All right. Thanks all. See you guys next week. Talk to you later.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone.